Greetings, girl, and welcome to my world of phrasing right up to bat. It's the daisy age, and you're about to walk top stage, so wipe your lottos on the mat. Hip hop love, this is, and don't mind when I quiz your.
1960, you have John Kennedy versus Richard Nixon. And with Kennedy and Nixon, Kennedy had supported the Civil Rights Act of 1957. Richard Nixon was the vice president during the Civil Rights Act of 1957. So they're both kind of in the game as far as being able to get African-American support. Kennedy, of course, can talk about Roosevelt's record, Truman's record. He can talk about the fact that, hey, you guys know Democrats were in the majority for the Civil Rights Act of 57. Even though Eisenhower signed it, we were in the majority. It don't happen unless we want it to happen. Of course, Nixon is able to say, well, don't forget, I was the vice president of the Civil Rights Act of 57. So they both have an opportunity to kind of play in that game there as far as trying to get the African-American vote. But then, the phone call. What's the phone call? Martin Luther King, civil rights activist, he actually had a license violation in Georgia. Of course, George, where else, right? As then and today, it's a criminal offense. So when he had that license violation, it was a criminal offense. You can be placed on probation or parole. So he's on probation. He then gets arrested again for doing a sit-in. When he gets arrested that second time, he has this license probation, which is a criminal offense, that he can be revoked on. Just like today, unfortunately, they're still criminal offenses. And the judge actually revokes him, sends him to Reedsville State Prison. Now, no state prison is where anybody wants to go. And that's nowadays with prison reform. We're not talking about back in 1960s. And so Coretta Scott King, she's very concerned. She's like, this might be it. They're going to try to kill my husband. So she calls a guy by the name of Harris Woodford. He works for Kennedy. Kennedy is just a candidate, understand. He's not the president right now. He's a candidate. He works for Kennedy. Woodford then calls a guy named Sergeant Shriver, who also works for Kennedy. Shriver convinces Kennedy to call Coretta Scott King and just reach out to her and say what he would like to try to do if he can help. You know, basically, if I can help, let me know kind of thing. I know it's relative. Today, you'd be like, well, what's the big deal? But you got to understand at that point in time, African Americans are fighting for their very humanity. To have a presidential candidate call the wife of Martin Luther King is a big deal. It matters. And so you may say, well, he's just trying to do it for votes. That's all. Well, that's interesting because his brother, Robert Kennedy, actually jumped all over Harris Woodford and said, you know what you guys just did? You just cost my brother the election. Because when we talked to Southern governors, they said you can do anything but you cannot support Khrushchev, who basically was the prime minister of the Soviet Union. You cannot support Castro down in Cuba, and you cannot support King. And he said, by you guys even making a phone call, you just cost my brother the election. So when you try to say, well, he just did that for votes. Nah, he did it because he actually thought it was the right thing to do. And it actually could have cost him the election. And then Robert Kennedy, he says, well, we didn't want this far. We might as well go all the way. He actually then calls a judge and makes sure King gets out. King gets out. He acknowledges what they did. He doesn't try to make a big deal about it because he doesn't want to try to sway the election. But he also doesn't say who didn't call him and who didn't call him. Richard Nixon didn't call him. Understand, Nixon knew who King was. Everyone in the country knew what was going on in Georgia. King's a major figure, so Nixon knew it. But here's the other key. Nixon isn't just a candidate. He's the vice president of the United States of America. If anybody should be calling and making sure this humanitarian, making sure the civil rights activists are safe, it should be the vice president of the United States. Nixon doesn't call. And so when that kind of word gets out, it helps Kennedy solidify the African-American vote, especially in Illinois, and he's able to become president of the United States. So Kennedy basically goes a little slow for my taste as far as civil rights is concerned. But after the Birmingham bombing of a church, he then basically presents what is the Civil Rights Act of 1964 with just a few tweaks here and there. Of course, he is assassinated and Johnson becomes president. And Johnson later interviews would actually say, I knew for a fact African Americans certainly were kind of concerned about me becoming president. But he actually goes forward, takes Kennedy's legacy, and passes the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now remember, this is where that story really takes off. You know, Republicans are always in African-American favor. We already have seen that's not necessarily true. Democrats are always against African-American. We've already seen that definitely is not true. But in 1964, we always hear the Democrats didn't want to pass it. They didn't pass it. It was only Republicans that passed it. Let's see if that's really true. Let's see if it was Republican and Democrat or it was Southerners that didn't want to pass it, because that matters. Well, who's in the majority? 1964, who's in the majority? You have a president, Democrat. The majority, once again, is a Democrat in the House, Speaker of the House. In the Senate, is the majority leader is also a Democrat. So they're in the majority. But now, let's check this out, because this becomes important. If Republicans were always in African Americans' corner, then that means if there were any Southern Republicans, and quite frankly, There were not a lot of them. But if there were, because they were Republican, remember, they were always in our corner. We already know that's not true. But if they were, they would have voted for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Let's look at it. Wasn't a lot, but let's kind of look. North Carolina had 2. Vote comes up, 2 noes. Tennessee had 3 Republicans. Vote comes up, 3 noes. Virginia had 2. Vote comes up, 2 noes. Texas had 2. Vote comes up, 2 noes. Florida had 2. Vote comes up, 2 noes. And in the Senate, Texas had 1 Republican. Guess what he voted? No. So now we kind of start understanding this is more of a Southern thing. And when Southern Republicans have an opportunity to stand up for civil rights, they fail too. But I thought the story was Republicans were always there. So we see it from 1877, that's not true, all the way up to this point. And then when they really have a chance to stand up, when they could lose their position, it's one thing to do it if you're a Northeastern representative or a Midwestern representative or Western representative. That's one thing. Well, you're in the South. Stand up. You're a Republican, Party of Lincoln, right? Stand up, do the right thing. They do the same thing Southern Democrats do. Exact same thing. But you know who else voted no and who wasn't a Southerner? And that's why the next part I'm going to talk about is now the decision. This person wasn't a Southerner. His name was Barry Goldwater. He lived in Arizona. He represented Arizona. He was a senator. He also was running for office for president. He voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But he's a Republican, right? Party of Lincoln. Didn't they always do the right thing? And Republicans are the only reason why these bills passed. He voted against it. And then that brought the question to the Republican Party convention in 1964. Do you want to go backwards? You've already gone backwards to some extent when you did Hoover appointing Parker and Lily Whiteism, et cetera. But now do you really want to go totally backwards and get Goldwater as your nominee? Or you could continue to try to compete for the African-American vote and have Rockefeller, who was more of a Northeastern liberal. And they chose Goldwater, which made Jackie Robinson, who was a Republican, person who broke the color barrier, very strong guy. And they do a whole feature on him because we always think about him as being the person who kind of turned the other cheek and he was kind of meek and humble. Nothing could be further from the truth, but you know that's how we're treated in media, kind of, so to speak. He actually said, he brought that term back in 1964 Republican convention because he was there. And he said, here we go again, basically. Republican Party returning to Lily Whiteism. And so that's the decision, that final decision almost, that Republicans made to say completely, we're done with the African Americans. Thank you for watching. This particular video is one part of a 4-part series. If you would like to learn more about the subject, please watch the remaining 3 parts, or you can watch it in its entirety by clicking the link below. I'm Georgia State Senator Harold Jones, and please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you again for watching.